Let's take a look at Garageband, the free recording software that comes with your Mac computer. When we first launch Garageband, we have a screen that looks like this, which is various options for how we want the session to look when we first create it. What we choose here isn't very important because we're going to start adding more layers of sound straight away. So if I just leave it as piano, I then need to keep track of where I am storing the file. Here I'm just putting it on my desktop. By default it will be named My Song, and I'm just going to leave it at that. The other settings, the options I have here, we can change later on as well if we need to, so I'm just going to leave them at their default settings and create a new session. There it is there. Okay, so it looks like this when we first open it. Let me just resize that. Okay, that looks better. Now, if I click the keys on this keyboard here, you can hear that already we're able to trigger sounds of instruments with MIDI. If you don't know about MIDI, a very simplified definition is really just a computer language that can trigger stored sounds. And the great thing about GarageBand is that it already has a lot of different sounds ready to go. We can just draw in the notes that we want to start creating music. So just to make sure it's working, I have a grand piano track that's already been set up. And if I double click in this screen here, we can see our piano roll. There's also an option for traditional notation here if you've come from that sort of background, but it's probably easier for us now to just start creating a song using the piano roll. Now if I simply hit the record button and click on the notes here with the mouse, we've put some notes in, and if I can then click this little play icon, and we can hear the notes that I've just played in over here. The clicking sound that's there to keep us in time can be enabled and disabled by clicking the little metronome icon here, but we'll leave it on while we're starting to come up with a new piece of music. This little button here, these are the mute and solo buttons that become very important once we've got a lot of tracks to work with. For now I'm actually going to mute that track. It's still there, I can still record with it afterwards, but for now I'm going to keep that muted. I want to create a bass line. So I'm going to click on this plus sign here, and I'm going to create another software instrument. The other options here will become important when we want to record real audio. So I'll create. It's now created another grand piano track. We don't want this to sound like a grand piano, so we need to change the sound that is being triggered by MIDI when we play them in. So all the different sounds that are built in here can be listened to. You just select it and click on the keyboard, and we can hear that we've got a bunch of options for bass sounds on this setting. I like the fingerstyle electric bass for now. It's just a very natural bass guitar sound, but we want to actually scroll down here and get to some lower notes that might be closer to what we're used to hearing for a bass track. That's good. I'm now going to just play in some random notes, but I want the actual song, the composition, to start at bar 5. I'm placing this marker at the top of bar 4, which means that I will have a 4-beat lead in to know that I will be starting my bass loop we'll create at bar 5. I'll hit record. And I'll hit spacebar to stop that. Now we can see here that it's pretty evenly occupying 4 bars here, which is your typical good starting point for creating a loop. I'm then just going to go in and move these notes around a little bit so that they are perfectly on the start of each bar here. I'm just clicking and dragging with the mouse. Yeah. Now if I listen to that, I'm going to turn the metronome off for this. I'm just going to listen back to what it sounds like. And that last note can be moved just by clicking and dragging as well. And that note there might be more what we prefer the sound of. And that will be fine. I'll just lengthen these notes. Okay, let's just work with that for now. Another common thing in a band arrangement would be drums. I'm going to create another software instrument. And this time we want a drum sound. We've got drum kit options here. Let's just see what the rock kit sounds like. Okay, there's some sounds for us. I'm going to place my marker at the top of the bass line again. I'm going to hit record again. In fact, I'm going to find the snare sound. There it is. So, typical trick is to have the snare hit on beats 2 and 4. We now have a basic snare pattern. Okay, now they're perfectly on beats 2 and 4 of each bar, so we now need to work out where we want our kick drum to be. When I hold the command key on a Mac whilst clicking in the grid here, I can draw in notes rather than play them in on the keyboard. There's our bass drum note. I can also select more than one note at a time by clicking and dragging over the ones that I want. And I'm just going to turn the velocity up to make those notes a little louder. Now, if I play it back and we'll put it in solo. There's a drum beat, albeit a fairly boring one. So I'm going to turn off the metronome now because this is enough to keep us in time. I might just draw in some hi-hat notes as well, wherever the hi-hat is. There's one. Okay. I can actually select all these notes. I have my regular editing shortcuts here where I can copy or Command C. And if I place my marker here, I can paste those notes and notice how the other notes that were there have kept their position. Now we've got a basic drum loop. And we can now use a very handy function here that if I hold my mouse just over the corner of the track here, you'll notice the clicker changes to this circle, which means I can actually just copy that whole thing and make it 4 bars longer. I'll do it again with this track. And now we have a repeating 8 bars. We didn't hear that first bass note, and that's because I just started right on top of the beginning. There it is. As long as we are working with MIDI, we're able to change the tempo with this option here on the master track pane here. This little info button will show that up if it's not on your screen. And I can hear this back now. We had it at 120 beats per minute. I can put it to a much slower tempo just to see how it sounds. Or a faster tempo. And we can move that around without any trouble as long as we are working with MIDI. Because we are going to create some real audio here by recording into GarageBand, we are then pretty much stuck with the tempo that we've set. So be careful with this before you're going to record some real instruments. And so we're going to create a track the way we usually would with the plus sign down here. But instead of a software instrument, let's create an electric guitar track, because I have my guitar plugged into the computer. So in order to do this, you will need an interface of some sort, just some way of converting the acoustic energy into data that can be read by a computer, basically. When recording real audio through an interface, we may need to either plug a microphone in, or, as I'm doing, just plugging a guitar straight into the interface, which is talking to the computer. You may have to change settings here, which we select GarageBand, Preferences, and in the Audio MIDI section, you'll be able to see your options for input devices. I have a Duet USB, which is what my guitar is plugged directly into. The microphone could be plugged straight into that as well, if I wanted to record an instrument acoustically or vocals. So by default, the guitar actually already has a amp simulator loaded up, and we can see that I've got my sound is going in here. So now I'll just place the marker at the top of bar 4 and make sure the metronome's on, and I have sound. I'll record some chords. So I'll now adjust the length of this audio track to make it start and finish in time with the loops that we've already created. And I'll hear it back with the bass and drums. I can also manipulate the sound of recorded audio tracks with the guitar. By default, guitar setting has a whole bunch of different amp sounds here that, if I can have a listen, so you can see you've got quite a bit of control of what your recorded audio sounds like after it's been captured. We can also alter and fine-tune sounds by using the more commonly used tools that a mix engineer utilises in every mix they'll work on. If we just focus on our bass instrument here, and so I've just got it in solo, it sounds fine, but we may find that we can get it to sit better in relation to the other elements in the mix. So if I select my edit window here, you can see that by default we have a compressor that's ready to go, but it's actually not switched on. This little green light will indicate whether or not it's actually affecting the sound. Now if we compare the sound of it off and then on, it's quite a subtle difference, but I do think it's actually thickening up the sound a little bit. If we want to see what other sounds we can find, might start with just selecting a preset, and bass punchy might be a good place to start. And we could tweak settings to, if we wanted a more drastic impact on the sound. The actual use of a compressor is probably outside of the scope of this video, but if I just do a quick demonstration, we can hear a drastic sound if I move some of these sliders around. Okay, so we'll just leave it at that for now, and probably the more commonly used tool with every instrument would be our equalizer. At the moment we've got a very slight boost in our bass frequencies, but again, if we compare the sound of some presets, okay, I quite like the result of the bass boost setting there. Now, the important part is how it sounds with everything else in the mix. And it is increasing the volume of the bass guitar quite a bit, so I could just lower my volume fader here. So by clicking in these empty boxes here is where I can add different effects to the sound. These can get pretty wild if we want them to. And the ones that are built in with Garageband give us a lot of options for ways of changing the sound. So from here I could then start adding whatever tracks that I liked, adding different software instruments, or I could record a acoustic instrument or a voice by plugging a microphone into my interface. If I've created a track which I no longer need, I can just select it in this screen here and use the keyboard shortcut Command Delete to delete that track. You can also add and delete tracks from the track menu at the top here. I have a track selected and I can just select delete track. Notice that all the keyboard shortcuts are along here as well. So once we've built up our arrangement with more instruments, we can then use these dials here to adjust volume to get the balance right between instruments. Clearly that guitar's way too loud now with the adjustments that have been made in the amp here. So I could also adjust where the elements are placed in relation to the left and right speakers. So there may also be times when we need a little bit of help with the initial idea for a piece of music. GarageBand has a lot of built-in loops that are already programmed and that can really save time for us to come up with a new arrangement. If I select my loop browser down here, you can see we've got a lot of options for different musical sounding loops. We've also got sound effects and things in here as well. And there are different ways of arranging all the program sounds. So I may again start with a bass line. And I can just drag that from here into a new section of the song. And I could also, because the MIDI data has been imported here, I could make little changes to the actual melody. And I have full control over the rhythm and notes that are going to be played. So I could move that note to that note. And then we can easily keep stacking sounds that way by just importing a beat, for instance. Let's see what a hip-hop beat sounds like with that. You can see that it's too long, so I could just shorten it for now. And you could very easily come up with a polished, complete sounding piece of music by stacking sounds this way. It's very useful. Once we've decided that we're happy with our mix and we want to hear it on another playback system, select share from the top toolbar here, and we've got a bunch of options depending on what we want to do with the song, but usually just to sample it, you could send it to iTunes and do whatever you like with the file from there. Garageband has many more functions and advanced editing tools than I've gone into in this video, but if you're just getting started with it, just create a session, play around, see what sort of sounds you can come up with. You can't break anything by just seeing what else other options you can find by cycling through sounds, and go berserk with experimenting with sounds, create new tracks, and have fun.